Hello.
Hi,
Hi,
Eren.
how are you?
Pretty good. My kids have played with my camera setup again. Anyway, I'm too low.
How was your day today, Eren?
Good. Not much. It's like I have three very little kids, so weekends are very exhausting. So just coming to the week is like a slight relaxation.
Nice. Uh, Eren, as people settle down, I'll just ask you some warm-up questions.
Of course.
Right. All right. I think I'm going to assume that you are a sci-fi fan, and I'm wondering whether you watched Dune this weekend.
Yeah, I watched that film 3 times or so. I just I need to just like watch it again in big screen. So I'm trying to find like a night that my kids are all gonna sleep early, so I can just go to a movie theater and watch it in large screen.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you happen to read the book too?
I hadn't read the books. I usually read books after watching movies. I'm not one of those like book nerds who start with the book and watch the adaptation later. I have always done the opposite direction. So I never get disappointed from like the adaptations.
Oh, that's a good trick, right? I think it worked very well for me for Lord of the Rings too. I watched the first movie, then I went back and read all the books.
Yeah, but I'm kind of now fascinated with the Dune universe. I just need to read all the books.
They are an interesting read. It's a little harder, I feel. The read is a little harder, but they are very interesting. What about, are you into Foundation also?
Yeah, I'm very into Foundation. Not as impressive as a fan adaptation, but yeah. So those are. I'm these days actually. For some reason, I'm kind of obsessed about spaceship design. Like, what would realistic near future spaceships look like? So for some reason, that's like one of the subjects. Like before I sleep, that's the topic I'm kind of researching.
Wow, interesting. So as we welcome everyone here, we're just talking about Foundation and Dune. If you watched it, you can raise your hand or something. Just get a sense of how many people watched. Oh, okay, there are some people. You see Mitra joining. How was your weekend otherwise, Eren, besides watching Dune 3 times?
Watching that's my kind of nighttime after I think 11 p.m. I can get to do that. But I have 3 little kids who are 2, 3, and 3 years old. Oh. So I joke that whenever someone asks how my weekend is, I said it was great. Like all the kids survived. So these days I'm like 2, 3, and 3. Like it's just make sure those kids are alive is my only weekend goal. But sometime after 11 p.m., that's like I have a couple hours I'm these days spending on kind of sci-fi.
Nice. So Gerta, let me know when you think we have quorum.
And are you guys going to South Park kind of the office there physically? Has that reopened already?
Yeah, it has.
Make sure it's there.
Yeah. There is an audience question. What is your favorite NFT?
I haven't been into NFTs yet, unfortunately, not to be disappointing, but I'm mostly joking about trolling the NFT world. But one of my co-founders at Carbon, like our early design co-founder, Pablo Stanley, has an NFT set called Robo NFT. So, and he also just like, I kind of helped me incubate this current startup, which is now also focused on NFTs. So if I was doing NFTs, I'd probably just go like start with investing in Robo NFT. So Pablo Stanley he's pretty, I think, well known on Twitter right now.
Yeah, there are some crypto people here for sure.
I actually spent I'm just gonna be honest, I've not got into the crypto world. Like 4 or 5 years ago, I did some kind of reading. I read the white paper and got to learn it, but I never actually worked on it professionally. So last couple of days, I was trying to just like catch up my own reading about the algorithms and everything behind the NFTs. But it was kind of disappointing that there are so many videos about how to buy and sell crypto and NFTs. I just like couldn't find anything which is more about like, I just want to see the algorithm. So I kind of realized I need to just brush up my coding skills and build something in the crypto world just to be able to understand it better. Otherwise, like just reading or watching for some reason hasn't worked for me. I was just, everyone's talking about how to buy them and sell them and make money and what NFTs to choose. Not much about more the kind of the, I guess I'm more interested in the coding part of it.
All right, I think we have quorum. So it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome Eren to our fireside chat. And I'll start with a formal intro and then we'll get into it. So Eren is the CEO and co-founder of Carbon Health. Eren leads the Carbon team towards its vision to democratize healthcare and make quality care accessible for everyone. Previously, Eren paved the way to make education accessible by founding Udemy, the world's largest marketplace for online courses with over 10 million students worldwide. In his youth, Eren was a star mathematician, winning awards in mathematics, physics, computer science, and chess, including at International Mathematical Olympiads. He still loves chess today and plays to unwind after a long day at the office. Carbon Health is a tech-enabled healthcare company that delivers virtual care experience. It offers primary care services through a mobile application that enables users to follow up on a treatment plan, manage prescriptions, and see lab reports all through one app. Carbon Health has created a coronavirus assessment tool and also set up COVID-19 testing in California. The company was founded in 2015 and is headquartered in San Francisco, California. So from SPC, welcome, Eren.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alok. And just gonna continue on that intro. So for Carbon Health is more of an omnichannel healthcare company. So we have both physical clinics, virtual care, and actually increasingly we are investing in hardware. So we have roughly 100 physical locations and on top of the kind of virtual services. Just kind of quick correction. But yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be chatting with everybody here.
Awesome. So broadly, the fireside chat would be, we'll try to understand Eren's background and his entrepreneurial journey with Carbon Health, especially, and his experiences as an immigrant entrepreneur, and dig a little bit deeper into Carbon. And then there were a bunch of audience questions about US healthcare in general and his advice for healthcare entrepreneurs and in general, other entrepreneurs. So with that said, Eren, can you tell us how was it growing up in rural Turkey like?
Sure. So I grew up in this like small village in southeast part of the Turkey. So my parents were teachers, and it was essentially our hometown kind of village was closer to kind of Iran-Iraq border, and it was right after the 1980 military coup in Turkey. So it was definitely both a rural kind of low-income place where I think 90% of the population was kind of making below poverty line, and also it had actually open conflicts. So there's like, there were economic sanctions there, so which actually kind of made the region even just go like further into poverty, right? So it wasn't, people were not even allowed to really have any more produce outside what's needed for them to just feed themselves. There was all these quotas and how much you can manufacture and produce. So it was definitely a place with both kind of political and economic tension. And my parents are very idealistic teachers. They're kind of very progressive teachers, and they kind of decided to move back to the region because there were no teachers in this entire surrounding area. I think like something like 10 villages had like 0 teachers because all the teachers and doctors who be sent to work there would quit their jobs just to kind of avoid going there. So there's really just massive gap there. So my mom was actually rotating between like 5 different classes for primary school. So she would start with the first grade, second grade, third grade, fifth grade, and just come back. Interestingly, she was also like after school, she was maintaining the school. Then even after school time, she would go like literally door to door, try to convince people to send their daughters to school, because also just at that time, it wasn't very as common for the families to like send their daughters to school like beyond the required school time. So it was essentially, they were like definitely very progressive people trying to just make a change in a relatively challenged environment.
Did you have brothers and sisters you grew up with?
Yeah, so I have two older sisters. So I'm the youngest, and one of them became a physician. She's a nuclear medicine specialist, and the other one is a civil engineer. She did masters in the aqua structures. But I actually think one of the things I find is the most whenever my background is covered, usually it's covered in the sense of look at this guy who came from this very small village to Silicon Valley success. But to be honest, what I find even more inspiring is essentially my mom and a couple other very progressive people made it so that area, which is again very challenged, end up graduating a ton of physicians and the economic, the education success of that region is just way above all the other regions, despite being very challenged originally, because I think when there were no economic opportunities other than just going to school, there was incredible drive among students to just latch on whatever educational options they had. So it wasn't just me on the side. If you just look at all the people who grew up in this very challenging environment, decent number of them just went to really got a lot of success in their lives. I mean, I have maybe 6 cousins who are physicians, and a ton of people did masters and PhDs. So I was probably the only one who had more of an economic success, entrepreneurial success, but I think this definitely I could see how when I talk about opportunities being really unevenly distributed, but talent is very evenly distributed. I just really get inspired from the region there.
Mm-hmm. So the region around you affected you obviously pretty fundamentally as you grew up, and you also talk about your idealistic parents, right? Yeah. How did they shape your worldview, and what ideals do you still carry from those times?
Yep. So, I mean, both my parents and a lot of my relatives were really idealistic, but more in the political scene. So essentially, I think we share the idealism, we share the focus on trying to improve things for people around us. I mean, their perspective was that you could only do mostly do this with political movement activism. And my father was union leader, so he was actually he was on and off his job because after the 1980 coup, he was expelled from his teacher job. So he was just taking a lot of different random jobs, from construction to just selling weed. I guess not weed, sorry, just said wrong term, but essentially selling grains and everything. So he was mostly he had been expelled from his teacher job and was taking random jobs to make ends meet. And during the summers, we would actually go work in a farm, just herding animals, apricot agriculture. But even in those times, they're still reading a lot of books. They were very they had all these friends who were intellectuals. So essentially, I think I definitely had a taste for just being very driven to make a change in your lives. And even earlier in my life, in my teens, I was more of I was a political activist, but over time, I think I just make the migration to saying, capitalism could be good if you start companies that actually have moral backbones, and just that you can actually have more sustainable changes. But I would say it's very common philosophies, but different practical methodologies to try to make positive change.
Mm-hmm. And we are going to dig down into the moral backbone of companies, and I really want to talk to you about that as we go into carbon and your entrepreneurial journey. In your childhood, you mentioned that you got, I think your intro mentions that you got into chess and mathematics. So yes. My question to you is, what are your favorite chess openings?
Yeah, my favorite is, I would say, a Caro-Canis. What I like playing as black sometimes, or Najdorf. I like King's Indian as a black. Mm-hmm. I like what else? These are ones I can enjoy. I do have a decent opening repertoire, but those are the ones I kind of enjoy playing the most.
How did you get into chess?
So my father knew a little bit chess. I think he had learned from somebody in his political activism. So chess was very popular in my region because it was interesting because that region was more a far left, had a socialist revolutionist upbringing. So because of Soviets, chess was very popular in Soviet. So I guess because of the popularity of Soviet chess, it was also popular in my region. So my father made chess pieces for me, just carving wood, and he had painted a board. So I had this like handmade chess set. So he taught me how to play when I was 4 years old, and probably just in a year I was just beating everybody locally. So, and he would take me to kind of chess tournaments in the city sometimes. So yeah, so he taught me, but I was kind of quickly running out of people I can play with. And initially, like early in my childhood, I thought I was going to be like a chess kind of grandmaster. That was my first like ideal future. But then I would say maybe when I was 10 years old or so, like my mathematics interest kind of took over the math. So there's a 25-year hole in my chess playing. So I restarted kind of very recently, but I was most interested in chess between like maybe from 10 years old to all the way to kind of college. And so I spent more time with mathematics than chess.
And mathematics eventually, your interest in mathematics eventually took you to Math Olympiads, where you won a silver, right? And which is pretty big deal. Is that right? Yeah,
exactly. So I think like I realized this whole Olympiad concept a little bit too late. So I only had 1 year to compete. So this was last year. I could legally compete. So because in my kind of hometown, like nobody even knew about really the Olympiads. Like it just wasn't a thing because again, there were not a lot of success in the kind of southeast part of Turkey. So, and I think when I was in middle school, I randomly attended one competition and kind of got like a first ranking in Turkey, and just people saw my name for a second and know like everybody forgot. So I just didn't know how to follow up. And I realized there were these like national Olympiads and international Olympiads. So I realized a little bit too late in the kind of last year. So I attended and ended up winning gold medal in Turkey and then silver medal in international Olympiads. And I think that part of the reason I was able to have any chances because in one of those years, our family, like we were working over summers to complement my parents' income. So just usually go take on a farm that nobody, like the owner cannot kind of process, and we just work there as a family. And at the end of the summer, if the produce is better than expected, you would have some extra income. So, and one of those years it actually was positive, and like we would either go for a vacation or I kind of pushed to buy a computer because one of my distant cousins was talking about this thing called computers, and I was really obsessed with the idea of it, but I had never seen one like in person really. So essentially my parents kind of agreed to buy a computer instead of going for our first vacation. And then it came with some internet access for a couple of months, and I started finding both two things really, like a lot more people to play chess. So that was going to be kind of potential breakthrough for me. And the more important, I found all this kind of content about international Olympiads and all those competitive mathematic problems. And I get really interested in just like self-teaching myself, talking to other people on the online communities. And actually, like to me, I mean, that was the difference between just like having zero chance to kind of compete versus having some chance, right? Because once I kind of got to do the first competition, then the government had programs to train us, and I was able to go to the next step. But I think internet was very, very critical, like for me to be able to take the first step there.
Mm-hmm. And so you came for Olympiads in the US, right?
Yep.
And did that influence your future decision to come study in the US or maybe one day start a business in the US?
I wish I had done that whole US thing earlier, because the teammates in the International Olympiads, they mostly came to United States to study. So I was a little bit too young. So I was, I think, 15 years old when I studied college, because I skipped 3 years in the earlier years. So I was too young, was kind of a little bit too scared to go from my small hometown to United States. It was like a scary jump for me. So I didn't apply for any of the US colleges, but like I definitely would have a chance to apply if I actually knew better. So I just studied computer science and mathematics in Turkey. And then after, like in the last year of college, I think for me, the way I came here is I built this music application in second year of college, because like I and most of my friends did not own personal kind of portable computers. So we were mostly kind of stationing in the university's computer labs. So when we wanted to listen to music, the music had to be local. But then when we go for internships over summer or other companies to work, so we wouldn't be able to carry our computers. So I had this idea to build a browser-based music player so we could actually listen to our music anywhere. I think that was 2001. So I built essentially a browser-based clone of Winamp, the popular music like MP3 player application. And when I was working on building it, I kind of realized I really enjoyed building products. And it became very popular among the students. So people were asking for feature requests. They want to ask me to build playlists and like save their popular songs. And it was definitely interesting kind of to just build something that people use and like. So I would say like sometime in my secondary and college, I realized I like competitive mathematics, but not academic mathematics as much. But then I really, really love building products. So my career plans transition from being an academician doing mathematics to more like building, maybe becoming an entrepreneur one day.
And that was your first earnest attempt at being an entrepreneur, would you say?
So like when I built the music player application, I had no idea that this whole websites or applications people build were actual businesses. I thought all of those things were somebody's like toy project. Even when I was using Google, I thought Google was somebody's kind of website, somebody's project. So I think I realized that these are real companies in 2005 when I started seeing, I guess, like early days of YouTube and other kind of companies came like Blogger. So I started realizing that like, look, these are actual real carriers. You can actually like do this full time as your job, right? Because otherwise I thought you had to make money from building software by just selling your software to other companies. So when I realized like that this the whole Silicon Valley world existed, so I get really fascinated about it, and I started working at nights for a couple of Silicon Valley startups as a way to kind of learn how the Silicon Valley world works. And I had tried to start Udemy in Turkey first in 2007 with my co-founder Oktay. But like we had no idea like how to really start a company. So the initial attempt was a failure. It was also a live education marketplace. It was not an on-demand education company. So we had to shut that down. I just migrated to Silicon Valley and then kind of started working full-time at one of those startups. And I think I learned a little bit more about the Silicon Valley and startup world. And then I went to this incubator called Founders Institute in their first class. And then really that was kind of like and I found a local co-founder named Gagan Biani. So essentially, really in 2010 in United Silicon Valley, like I honestly finally realized this whole startup world and how it worked and fundraising. Those concepts were very foreign to me, I would say, until 2009.
I see. And you started a company, Udemy. Then what was the time you think you first became interested in healthcare?
My interest in healthcare started really, I would say like 4 years into Udemy. So at that point, Udemy was a kind of sizable company growing very fast. But my mom had this disease called neuropsychosis. So all of a sudden she had this full body stroke, which was completely unexplained. So I had to go back to Turkey for 3 months, taking time off my CEO job. And my sister is a physician. So she was mostly running the show, but so she had extracted all of my mom's medical records from different hospitals, different doctors' offices, her like labs, MRIs, of the prescription history. And so my mom was not really able to talk. So my sister would tell the story of what happened and how it progressed. And I think we kind of went to 13 different specialists to understand what was happening. So my mom recovered. So there's no sad story here, but eventually one of the physicians diagnosed it properly and the treatment worked well. But at that point, I was kind of observing how bad the tools were for physicians. I was kind of just like really observing that the physicians who are really scarce resources of any company in the world had much worse tools than cab drivers, right? So like cab drivers had Uber and Lyft, which were amazing tools, which made them extremely efficient. And then we were like wasting probably like 3/4 of like physicians' time with the real bad tooling. So I kind of said like somebody has to build better tools for these doctors. And when I was in Turkey, I just essentially sketched out like, I think 10 screens, which was like how I would build software for doctors if I was kind of controlling it. So I just made essentially my first sketches for an electronic health record systems, which was designed to help physicians kind of find diagnosis faster. I remember actually one of the first ideas I had was like aggregating all the medical records in a place so that when you have a case where you are not sure about the diagnosis, you could immediately tell, have the system find similar cases with kind of comparable lab readings or kind of symptomology and everything. So because essentially each case is very unique, but there's definitely some similarities between different cases. And one of the inspirations I had was, so my sister sent me a bunch of presentations from their kind of medical conferences. So actually he showed me how physicians kind of present medical cases in conferences where I mean, they had a really presentation that really made sense. It talked about the problem and readings. It didn't just dump a bunch of data and like kind of redundant verbiage. It was essentially a presentation that really made it easy for people to understand what was happening. So I kind of designed like software UI that matches kind of how I perceive physicians' way of thinking. But then I kind of left that there because it just came back to Silicon Valley. I was the CEO of a growing company, so I didn't think too much about it for a couple of years. And then eventually, when I decided to step down from Udemy to kind of let somebody like more experienced CEO take over, and I wanted to do something in healthcare because I had this kind of thought about how bad the physician tooling was and how it wasn't rocket science to just make it better. And then simultaneously, I was also getting disappointed that there were all those technology-based healthcare providers, but all of them almost exclusively focused on being healthcare provider for Google employees. And I felt like hundreds of startups trying to replace Google employees providers, and nobody was trying to do this for the average teacher, average retail employee working at Home Depot. So I was like huge hole in mainstream healthcare, like nobody's kind of tackling it with a technology-based approach. And that was this disappointing. And also, I also find that it's stupid, to be honest, because in my mind, like if you are targeting high-income people, you can rely on things like having long appointment times, having luxury clinics. So like you can rely on things that are not really technology-based to improve the customer experience, which is what I thought most of the concierge healthcare companies were doing. But if you wanted to make healthcare better truly for mass market customers, you have to rely a lot more on technology. So it was to me like both like a disappointing thing that there was no mainstream healthcare provider using technology, but also it was like a huge like hole because tech is how you actually make a difference there. So actually between having a thesis about the patient experience, how much better it could be, plus understanding that the physicians are so inefficiently utilized, so you could actually make them a lot more productive with technology. So I thought somebody had to build really all of this from the ground up. So honestly, like I did not have my idea wasn't very well formed, except I just kind of knew somebody had to kind of bite the bullet and just build the entire technology platform from the ground up in a way that makes sense to patients and providers.
And then this led to Carbon, right? And a question is, why the name Carbon?
So my initially, honestly, for the first 3 years of the company, I had a couple key insights and theories about healthcare, but I did not know healthcare enough to have a educated business model in mind. So like for the couple of years, like we were trying to, like I had some pieces in mind and some pieces which were kind of very much still like kind of in progress. So my original idea was like building what I called world's largest hospital by creating a network of all the individual smaller practices. So the idea was like, what if I put the software in the middle and partner with all the small practices to create like a really deeply connected, very large network. So my tagline was, if Airbnb is the world's largest hotel network without any buildings, and Uber is the world's largest cab company without owning any cars, like what would the world's largest hospital look like? Especially if we can try to build in a way where we don't own the physical locations, but we just own the software and the engagement layer. So that was the original idea. And carbon elements make these really large molecules. So I was kind of using large carbon-based organic molecules as a visual analogy to a large network of like independent components. It also kind of sounded somewhat like futuristic. So when I said like carbon health, everybody just assumes it was going to be tech-enabled and modern. So it kind of did the job for me.
So we are in the initial few days of Carbon Health, right? You're a successful, one can say, tech-based CEO. going to VCs and saying, I want to raise money to fundamentally transform healthcare, but starting with primary care, right? What was that experience like, going from tech to healthcare and then with this audacious vision?
So I would say, like, I was able to read seed round easily because honestly, most of them were just existing Udemy investors. So they just wrote a check regardless. So, and the part which was really hard was after the seed round. So because I had a couple views about how you should tackle this, which strongly disagreed with the common venture wisdom back in that time, in 2016, 17, because there were a couple of things that I was very opinionated about. One, I was opinionated that you need to own physical locations because I just didn't believe a pure telemedicine play would actually kind of make a big disruptive change in healthcare space. Like, as a telemedicine, if it was purely telemedicine, it was going to be complementary. It was not going to replace kind of core healthcare. And also, the reason I thought that way is because I knew about the concept of telemedicine for 10 years or so, but I had never actually used that. And I was like, everybody knows about it, nobody really uses it. Like, and when you use the once, it's not like a magical experience. Like, so I mean, by and large, I thought like healthcare will still have a physical component. And I was also opinionated that you should start this in primary care space because the primary care, which is essentially your first decision in healthcare, that's a consumer decision. So if you want to disrupt an industry with better customer experience, you just need to be in a space which is a consumer decision, because otherwise, like if you build an amazing oncology service, right, or maybe cardiology service, right, most of the time your customer is not the patient, because the customer is the health system or the primary care physician who's referring the patient to you. So essentially it's kind of hard to win with better customer experience. So I thought it has to be primary care. And then I was really obsessed that this had to be mass market. This had to be accessible to at least like 80% of the population, so if not 100%, which meant like we had to accept insurance, we had to be very affordable in pricing. And I would say like when I was talking to investors, like everybody like hated the idea. Like it was just, they hated the idea so passionately, despite the fact that I was a very like established entrepreneur with a decent, like multi-billion-dollar startup under my belt. Despite that amount of I would say like social kind of proof, like just like I had like mostly just no. Like people would just, honestly, most people didn't even understand what I was doing. It was like it kind of felt stupid to them that I would just actually kind of attempt to open physical locations. And actually, I remember one of the very smart investors said, like, there are 4 things I never touch in healthcare space. He said, like, I avoid them like plague. He said, physical locations, the brick and mortar, primary care, issue space, fee-for-service reimbursement, and direct-to-consumer place. He said, if you were building a virtual, like, let's say, cardiology provider, playing in the maybe like maybe B2B enterprise kind of go-to-market or value-based go-to-markets, it's pure telemedicine, no physical location. He would say, like, I would just write you like a $10 million check like today, just like without blinking. But he said like I was doing everything he hates in health. He just like avoids in healthcare. So that was a very, I would say, dominant situation. Honestly, we really struggled with financing between 2017 to 19, which was like the time where what we were doing had all this interesting anecdotal evidence about the customer experience and providers loving it, but it wasn't obvious in just basic economics. We hadn't proven it fully yet. And it just was anti-common venture wisdom. So I would say it kind of changed in 2019. Honestly, 2 things happened very rapidly. Actually 3 things. One single investor actually liked what we were doing, which was Brookfield Venture Partners. So essentially Brookfield had built this technology investor arm. They liked the idea that we control the clinics and physical locations because they were very focused on consumer experience as the most important deal. And they had already made the decision that like nobody was going to change healthcare customer experience without owning the physical location. And they actually liked that we were very vertically integrated. And I think soon after that, we were able to prove the unit economics with real like P&L numbers. So our clinics started hitting this profitability metrics that that was kind of hard to honestly debate anymore. And lastly, general investor sentiment against the primary care world and the physical locations kind of changed very rapidly. So it went from being very unpopular to being very popular in a year or so. So essentially, I think we spent like 2-3 years really building the fundamentals when it was in like unpopular kind of like vertical. And then by the time we were able to scale it, it just finally all of a sudden became very popular. So it's kind of, honestly, timing worked out because often you need like a 3-4 year incubation period to be able to build the fundamentals, the infrastructure. And it's really hard to do this when the market is very competitive. When there's a lot of hype around the market, it's really hard to build kind of robust infrastructure because you're always like feeling rushed to go to market. So I think it actually worked out for us that like was unpopular, which meant we built a lot of software to be able to kind of solve the ugly problems. And then later on, once we started scaling, it kind of flipped 180 degrees.
So actually, I mean, I think it was because of Carbon and a few others that lit the path right now that many tech companies can even imagine doing care delivery. Because if you go back and look at your Disrupt demo, right, tech, the number of features that you have suggested and so much fundamental work you have done in building the tech, I think each of them can be sustainable businesses. So it's very interesting that you came up to the conviction of doing physical locations 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yep.
My question to you is, was that slow to get to conviction, or you were like, nope, this is not going to work, I better just do physical locations?
Yeah, I think physical location was like, was not like up to debate for me. I just like, from day one, I like nobody could convince me that you could actually truly disrupt healthcare without owning physical access points. So, I mean, we can talk about it for a long time, but I had like a very strong conviction. So even when all the VCs hated it kind of just very passionately, like we just went through the hump and kept that part going. And the other part was I had extreme conviction was that you had to rebuild the entire technology surface area from the ground up. So because I knew that the doctor's tooling was so bad. So when in 2016, we decided to open our first clinic inside our office to just kind of learn how to build software. And not only we did not use any third-party EHRs or any other technology at all, I made it forbidden for our team to even look at them. I'm just not joking. It was actually it was forbidden in Carbon Health to look at other EHRs, to look at Epic or eClinicalWorks and all the other like shitty software, because I had this thesis that they had all this historical baggage because they were designed a particular way 4 years ago and didn't change it. And I was seeing a lot of really obvious problems with the way they were architected. But the issue is like EHR, the electronic health record, is such a complex piece of software, like that you don't know what you don't know kind of software to build. So we had always temptation to just look at how other companies do this and make it slightly better, versus I kind of wanted to really ask to kind of rethink it from first principles. So I was really fanatically obsessed about this like first principle design idea, but it just wouldn't work if you looked at how Epic even operates, right? So I just made it forbidden. So we started accepting some patients. We started hiring some clinicians, and we started seeing patients for free. And we didn't even tell them it was free. So we acted like we were accepting their insurance. So we simulated how it would work, but we had no insurance contracts. So we were actually practically the care was free in the first year or so. But we still kind of slowly started building the patient experience and the provider experience. And honestly, I would say that most of the interesting opportunities we found to improve like how things work, honestly, I think were because I made it forbidden to look at other EHRs. Because we end up building features and like tools in our first year of operation that no EHR had ever actually built before. So essentially what we considered important from first principles was like 100% different than what all the other EHRs who have been around for like decades consider as important functionality. So we built things that nobody else had. But then when we first launched it and we were seeing patients, we then realized like we have some holes. So we later couldn't close those holes. So it kind of became more of a robust platform. But it took really 3 years in iterating on the software before we started scaling it. And meanwhile, like very quick, maybe like in a year after launch, I changed my thinking that instead of a kind of a model where we don't own the clinics and we just own the software piece, I just decided that we should be owning all the primary care side of things. And maybe for specialty care, we could actually partner and like license the software and build more like a network. But I just like my first principle thinking realization was primary care is so complicated operationally that it's just really not viable for a small physician practice to do it properly, because it is very little income, very high operational complexity. So I kind of thought like that layer is really the hub of healthcare, is the primary care layer. So I said like, if you want to build really truly like a network, we just had to own the hub. Otherwise, it just was not going to work. And also, none of the kind of internal medicine residents I met who are younger, like none of them wanted to own a primary care practice anymore, because they all just wanted to work in a mission-driven healthcare provider. Essentially, I was realizing this whole idea of like a physician-owned practice concept was dying in the primary care world, which was for the same reason. It was like operationally, administratively very complicated, and the margins are so low, it just is not worth it for somebody to own their own practice. So I kind of just switched from marketplace-based model to just owning the first layer at Carbon, and maybe only having a marketplace-based, network-based approach for the kind of secondary layer.
Mm-hmm. And was it easy to convince the doctors who are already using these old EMRs and old tech to move off to like a completely new system? How did you do that?
Honestly, it was like easy because there was a lot of selection bias. Like the people who wanted to work at Carbon were the doctors who wanted to do things differently. So I think even when we first started, so we had this small doctor's practice called Direct Urgent Care, which was using our software before we became vertically integrated. And their owner, Caesar, was a physician who always wanted to have a platform just like Carbon. Because when he first saw our demo, I showed him like in San Francisco, and he was like so shocked to see it, because he had always been the information systems person for large health systems. So he had seen everything in EHR. And when he saw ours, he said, why, just looking at your software, I can tell that you guys actually have a practice inside your office. I can tell that your physicians and doctors work together. Your engineers and designers and doctors sit next to each other building the software. So he had just immediately understood that this was built differently because we had this is more like a deeper feedback loops. So he made a huge, he was he was the visionary physician zero who just bet his entire company on a completely untested technology platform. And 3 months after we deployed our software platform, it was so successful. The numbers changed so drastically, especially the retention numbers and engagement numbers. I just offered to kind of merge with his practice and just our software company and his medical group to kind of merge into a single vertically integrated healthcare provider. But I think we continue to self-select people who are very kind of savvy. And there's actually a quote that like Caesar said in a Forbes interview. He said, doctors don't hate software, they just hate your shitty software. So like he said it in a nicer, without the profit. I added the shitty part, but like it is like doctors, like I know the doctors are some of the most well-educated, relatively high income kind of people. Like they use the iPhone, they love their like Teslas and they love their like Slacks and all the other software. They just hate Epic and eClinical works, right? And there are a lot of very good reasons to hate them.
So that's very interesting. So Carbon is in getting bigger and bigger in 2019, and 2020 we know what happened to the world, right? COVID fundamentally changed a lot of things for us. And what was interesting is Carbon was so effective in pivoting and turning around and addressing this both in terms of vaccinations and testing. How did you pivot Carbon to affect that, and how in return COVID has changed Carbon health?
Yeah, no, I think COVID was definitely a big turning point for Carbon. So before I even started Carbon, I think it's important to understand like the value number one of Carbon. Carbon has 4 values, but the first one is the most important one, because I drafted it before I started the company. So when I wanted to start a new company, I said, I'm going to start a company which just assumes, believes that karma exists in the business world, right? So not religiously necessarily, but like I had the thesis that as a company, if you do the right thing consistently, right, you eventually get rewarded in non-linear ways, right? Mm-hmm. So if you calculate the value of what you are doing, you get rewarded linearly, right? So you improve your advertising conversion rates and you get some improvement in your business. But if you do the right thing consistently, I think there's this like, people just observe this, people just start rooting for you, and eventually you get rewarded in ways you could never just know would happen. So this whole like karma in business it was like a very fundamental value of carbon. So, and what happened in 2020 is very early on, we realized COVID was in the community already. So because we had this pre-appointment question system, and when we started observing COVID in Wuhan, China, we added a couple screening questions for COVID risk. And this is in January, right? This is way before it was considered as a pandemic. And then we launched those 2 new questions. And literally 3 days later, I get a call from my medical director saying, we had at least 2 patients in our clinics who fly directly from Wuhan, China to Bay Area, came to our clinics with respiratory symptoms. So we made this like, I think mid-February. I was initially not honestly taking it as seriously as like our VP of product, Ayo Omoyola, he was actually taking it very seriously. So we had a couple people who are extremely nervous about this and we're taking super, super serious. Essentially, a couple of people who were more like, who were in Balaji's camp in terms of like how serious this could be. And some didn't take it as seriously. I was kind of in the middle as the CEO. I was trying to find the right call. And eventually, I think Ayo and one more person convinced me that we should take COVID extremely seriously. We should assume it is going to be like a worldwide pandemic. So, and after like he convinced me, I just drafted, I scheduled an emergency meeting, executive meeting next day. And we went to the office and I wanted to brainstorm what we could do to have with the pandemic if we know it's going to become a worldwide pandemic, worldwide kind of like crisis situation. I actually said like, what would we wish we would have done today if we knew it was going to be horrible? And just as the conversation started, I drafted 12 ideas, which were meant to be like out of box, completely stupid, crazy ideas. Because one of the assumptions I made it was like, look, our clinics will be under a lot of risk. So I just assumed our clinical team would want us to practically shut down the locations until COVID is put under control, because they're definitely taking the most risk. And at that time in Italy, a lot of medical providers were dying. I think like something like 10% of everybody who died in Italy, and a big percentage of the people who died in China were like frontline medical workers. So I assumed that our clinical teams would just want to avoid it very kind of strongly. So, and actually one interesting thing that happened that morning is our chief medical officer had talked already to some of the clinical leaders, and they had decided to just lean into the pandemic instead of avoiding it. Because at that moment, I think as things got more serious, most of the hospitals were kind of reducing shifts. They were laying off medical workers. You might remember like early March, like a lot of people actually lost their jobs or lost their shifts because everyone was trying to kind of avoid surfacing themselves to COVID, because that was like an outbreak would be a huge risk for the providers. So our chief medical officer like made the decision to lean into it and be in the front lines. And then we just discussed all those kind of crazy ideas. And over the next 1 year, 1.5 years, I think we have done every single thing in that list. It's not just the vaccine and testing are the ones that obviously were very scale. So we did everything from simple things like we built the first risk assessment tools. We started doing COVID testing in our clinics. We built a mobile trailer. We built a group of mobile trailers, which went to underserved communities in California and got them tested. We launched the first at-home testing kits. And we are still doing at-home testing. So we then published our clinical data set open source so that the researchers could actually model COVID risk. So I think we still manage the largest open source clinical data set for COVID. And even that small idea is like a very tough project, because like you had to share the data publicly in a way that preserves privacy, which means like we were using some machine learning to put enough noise in the data so that you cannot reverse engineer any single patient's medical records. But collectively, the data kept all the scientific characteristics of the kind of combined data. It was essentially decently hard to do the clinical data set. So we have been very involved in clinical research. So we have partnered with pharma companies to develop therapeutics and diagnostics for COVID. We were involved in vaccination. We were involved in COVID positive care. Essentially, if you actually catch COVID, normally like all you get here is like, okay, go home, quarantine yourself. And if you cannot breathe, then come to the ER. So, and we built the kind of first actual kind of program to help them recover. Because even if you don't get hospitalized, like it's actually the conditions your body so much that you kind of need some help to get back to your full health. So it's actually, I think overall, like there's like 12 different services, products, software. So we really pivoted the entire company's resources into like a wartime mode. And we said, how can we help our communities? We never calculated what was going to be long-term or short-term. We just honestly did those things. And overall, we got rewarded in ways that we could never imagine. Honestly, like the number one thing is we built a lot of super fans. Like I think I started seeing these people, especially on Twitter, who were just really becoming fans of carbon, and they had no commercial relationship with carbon at all. But like, I mean, for example, there was a moment where Google shut us down, and a former Google exec was write like the 3-page letter to all the top execs at Google to just plead them to unblock our application, right? So like essentially those type of things were showing that like the things which we did because we thought we were the right things to do kind of rewarded us in just like dozens of different ways. And then that also kind of collided with the moment where we were opening all the new clinics. So essentially we went from 7 clinics to 25 to then 40 clinics, and this year we are going to have 120 at the end of the year. So essentially we're opening all these clinics, and the brand halo of code-related services also allowed our core businesses to kind of prosper and acquire customers faster. So all of us, overall, like we were already growing fast, and we just doubled our growth. So we went from I think 250 employees in the January of 2020 when we did that meeting to like now 2,800 today. So just like a massive kind of growth happened. So, and some of it can be contributed to our kind of really good, the brand halo of our code-related services.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And here we are, right? In this whole journey, besides a little bit of the funding part, what were some of the most challenging moments you think?
I think for me, the most challenging, I mean, early days of companies was challenging for fundraising purposes. So but like once they proved the model, that I think got resolved. So the most challenging part for the last 2 years have been that we did some really impressive work to serve our communities, but there's no magic in like what we did. We actually just worked very, very hard. So it's, I mean, we essentially, we did 2 things. We just aligned the entire company into just like very specific goals. And actually our company is very diverse, right? We have all those engineers, physicians, legal, like marketing, like we have a lot of different disciplines. We just kind of, I just put all of their minds into just a really singular visions. And then they worked super hard. Like they were early this year, especially when we took over Los Angeles vaccine kind of project, it was just a ridiculously hard time. Our support teams, like our operational teams, have been really kind of overwhelmed time to time. And honestly, like there were times where I see like them getting burnt out, but then they were also proud of what we were doing. So there's this like interesting feeling of like, at one perspective, you are just super proud because you kind of come together and achieve this really impressive feats. But then also that means like you see your children sometimes for a month or so. Like some people had young people like newborns, and it was the same for me. I had like 3 little kids, and we were working until 11 p.m. every night, like for almost 10 months or so, right? So, we are now kind of recovering and try to like get back to more of a balanced kind of state. But yeah, I think it was like balancing, like, okay, we just cannot balancing like how much people can work, but then on the other hand, what you do has like real community impact. So people are dying. I mean, January of 2021, when we started the Los Angeles vaccine project, 250 people were dying from COVID every day in Los Angeles alone. So, and we said like, look, if we can accelerate vaccine distribution by 10%, even that's like almost 1,000 people, fewer like people who will die there. So, and we thought we could improve, like help there. So it's just really kind of balancing your own employees, like kind of lifestyle, like kind of mental health and versus, but then this real community, like impact what you're doing. That was it. Because like none of these were commercial things. Most of the things we did, like they were not recurring businesses or anything for us. Like we did all the vaccine projects. It's not recurring. No investor cares about the revenue we made there. It was also like a zero margin, which is like legally tested with zero margin for us. But like, so like the business argument wasn't clear, and it was a ton of work, which also detracted us from some other longer term kind of investments, right? Like there's a real cost to your business. So actually finding that balance between like doing good for the community, but also like your business, your employees, like that was the toughest kind of part of what I did.
One final question from me, and we have one question from the audience. So one question from me is, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who do mission-oriented startups such as yours? Like you mentioned the importance of karma. And I think related would be, what are the qualities of a good CEO you consider, coming from a tech background too?
Yeah, I would say about the mission drivenness and karma is like, my karma idea is a little different than being like very philanthropic, right? So to be honest, I'm not even the most philanthropic person on earth. Like a lot of people assume I'm very philanthropic because I'm doing education and healthcare and accessibility is critical. I actually believe it's a good business strategy to just do the right thing consistently. I think a mistake I see very often, especially in healthcare spaces, people sometimes believe in their mission so much. They think that our mission is so holy that it justifies all the bad things we are doing today, because we are like, there's eventual thing we are doing, which is so important that like it justifies our bad behavior. I would bet like even in Taryn's situation, like she didn't think what she was doing was bad, but she just like believed her own missionary statement so much that she thought like cheating here and there would be justified in the long run. So I actually think like I have a big issue with that concept. I actually think it's the opposite, which is like, whether you are just doing like something in healthcare or education, or even you are like selling logistics software to e-commerce companies, it doesn't matter. I think it's just like all the day-to-day decisions like are the things that matter. So if you're not making day-to-day decisions with moral backbone, like it's just like having a grand, like look at the more like most fragile companies in the world. They have the coolest mission statements. So like they almost use it as a cloak to just like hide their bad deeds. Like, I mean, there's been more like fraudulent behavior in healthcare space than any other space. I think it's more about like day to day. What do you do? Like, do you just make like ethical decisions, kind of like in like whenever it has real business cost to your company? And I think when you do and like people observe it, and that just like even journalists, right, like who are very skeptical about companies, they just observe who's being authentic about their mission versus who's just talking about it. Actually, there's this joke I make, which is sometimes when I do the new employee onboarding, they ask me a question very commonly. They say like, look, our mission statement looks just like the mission statement of every other company. So what's our differentiation? And I answer like, we mean it. Like everybody else does not mean it. So
we have time for maybe one question.
Okay, I'm free like after now. Normally I was going to have another podcast right now, but I can extend another 10-15 minutes.
Oh, thank you so much. If people are willing to stay, please stay behind. There's so much to ask. So Omar, I saw one of your questions. Why don't you go ahead and ask directly?
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, so my question was around that initial beta rollout of the spaces, where you said you subsidized like user care, but you were able to get like end-to-end feedback. I was wondering how you thought through that. Like how did you think about like the timeline? How did you think about how many users you wanted to serve, or how much it would cost to subsidize?
Yeah, so it was such a very, very simple and relatively first principles game. So you had to figure out what are the biggest questions you are answering in the early days of a company. But you have to have a thesis, and you have to understand what's obvious, what's not obvious. For example, if you're building a social media application, right? Monetization is not rocket science. You just like put up ads. Like you don't have to prove that you can put up ads on your website. You just have to prove that you can get paid customers to come back and again. So in our case, so the things that the hard questions was one, will this very mobile-centric customer experience be interesting to customers? That was question number one. I was mostly sure the answer was yes, but it was just worth testing it. So we kind of first built the entire patient experience of the platform. But while proving that, we couldn't simultaneously work on the provider side. So essentially hire physicians full-time, and we were seeing very small number of patients, so that even if the backend was very inefficient, it would be fine because the patient volume was very, very low. So they could actually mimic it. But the critical thing was, we weren't allowed to prove good past customer experience if we are not doing things in a scale, like in a sustainable way. For example, having long appointments were not allowed. So you had to have appointment times which match what you could realistically do in a real world scenario, right? Second thing was, we couldn't actually make it free because obviously any free healthcare is good for like this number of people. So we had to kind of act like we were charging patients, so they didn't think of this as free healthcare. So essentially, we simulated. It's kind of like writing software, right? So you have to stop certain things so that you can test only one piece. The one piece was, do patients like this very mobile-centric customer experience? So we faked the provider efficiency piece, we faked the cost piece, we faked the appointment duration, we intentionally limited it. But then we could only I thought we could only serve like 50, 60 patients with our providers. So we did that, and it was successful, but there was one issue. Our initial pilot was mostly friends and family, and they were just mostly like young, affluent people. So what they were asking us to improve were not things that I thought was in line with like what normal patients would ask. So eventually, like after a couple of months, I made the decision to open it to all the other patients. So we just opened it to the broad public. So we just kind of proved the patient side relatively quickly. And then we switched to the provider side. The provider side took more like a lot longer because we had to just like take pieces at a time. And we knew that the billing was going to be the most complex piece. So we kind of delayed that part. So we outsourced the billing in the beginning. But then all the other pieces, we just like one by one kind of rebuilt the e-prescription labs, charting. And we had some of the original ideas which proved to be bad ideas, but a lot of them actually turned out to be good ideas. So it was really just sort of thinking about like, what's the minimum thing I can do to prove the core problem while simulating everything else. I think sometimes people make the mistake of building small thing that is theoretically a product. I think it's more about the question you're trying to answer. Like, what's the question you are answering, and what's the small thing you can build to answer that question. For example, even the first version of the application had pretty good customer experience because we were trying to prove that patients will like a good customer experience, which is mobile driven. If you had a shitty customer experience in an app, that wouldn't answer the question in either way, right? So we just had to build like a really polished application in the day one, while the rest of everything else was kind of fake to make the system work.
So we may have time for one small question before we respect everyone's time and Eren's time too. So Keegan, did you have a question? Quick question, maybe?
Yeah, sure. You keep bringing up first principles thinking, and I assume it's because it's sort of from your mathematical background, or at least feeling like you have a similar background. I feel like just intuitively, that's what I assume. And I was just curious if that's like something that you've always exported. I feel like it's guided a lot of the decisions that you've made.
Yeah. Look, I think it was not purely mathematical for me. It was mostly, I'm actually more intuition oriented than most tech founders, I would say, or like designer oriented, you could even say. Like Udemy was successful in my mind because we were solving a problem that was relevant to the entire population. And I felt like in Silicon Valley, everybody claims to be very like innovative, but there's a huge amount of herd mentality in Silicon Valley, right? So essentially Silicon Valley is an extremely analog like thinking town because something becomes popular and all of a sudden like the entire founders and investors are focused on the new concept, and that thing loses popularity and all of a sudden everybody can realize it was a bad idea, like at the same time. So there's extreme amount of like herd mentality in Silicon Valley. And I feel like the only way to kind of break out of it is just not getting hype, kind of sucked into hype in any direction and really thinking for yourself. So, because the funny thing is like people all think they're being contrarian, but they're contrarian in the exact same direction. It's just the herd mentality of contrarian thinking. And usually the holes I find in entrepreneurship opportunities is like when everybody thinks, for example, when Udemy first started, everybody thought like content problem was already solved. And the future of education was all going to be about replacing teachers with like AI and just having adaptive learning and things like that, which like everybody had that contrarian idea, right? So, but it was not a contrarian because everybody had the same idea. Whereas what I said is like, we're not even close to solving the content problem. Like we don't have any content, like we're not even barely scratching the surface. So I kind of realized there was a hole there. So similar in healthcare. So everybody's like always thinking about like AI replacing doctors, have like cool ideas, and people think they're being contrarian about that thinking versus every single VC has the exact same line of thinking. So like everybody thinks that we'll use devices and the data is gonna change. You need like genetics and but in reality, what my contrarian viewpoint was, look, the basic digitization of healthcare has not happened yet. Like first, you need to have some vertically integrated healthcare providers like digitize the infrastructure, and in the future, some of those ideas might be relevant. But like we are like my unique thinking was that like all the other stuff people were working on were like 15 years too early, right? Versus today, you just needed to build exactly what carbon health is. Anyways, it's a mix. So I don't consider it like a purely scientific way of thinking. I think it's a reaction to the herd mentality here.
I think we are at time.
Eren, yeah, I wanted to thank you on behalf of South Park Commons as well. Thank you for taking this time to chat with us. We did source a lot of the questions from the community. So in a way, Alok has been representing the voice of the community throughout. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Eren, yeah, thank you so much, Eren, for this wonderful 1 hour with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.